your broadcast now.
Hi, welcome to Sky News on Facebook. We're live in Birmingham this lunchtime and we're talking about armed police officers. On Sky News this morning you may have seen an in-depth report that we've put together talking to many of the armed police officers who are on patrol in the West Midlands or who are retraining from being unarmed police officers to actually carrying firearms and going through that very rigorous testing process. You may have seen the report. We'd like you, of course, to have a look at it. It's available on all Sky News platforms, but we're here to discuss some of the issues that it throws up. What is the effect of having more police officers on the streets? And the reason that they are having this recruitment drive here in the West Midlands and in other parts of the UK is because of the Paris terror attacks. And of course, what we've seen in Europe has changed the game. That is how one police officer described it to me in terms of how they get ready to deal with that kind of terror threat here in the West Midlands and anywhere pretty much close to where you live, no doubt. If you're in the UK, the threat is very real, and of course in Western Europe too. So as I say, we're in Lascelles in Birmingham and we're here to talk to a community activist, Desmond. Welcome back to Sky News on Facebook here in Lascelles in Birmingham, and as I was saying, we were having a discussion really looking at the issues raised by all these extra armed police officers who are going to be on the streets very soon. Some are already on the streets in response to the terror threat and the terror situation that we saw so acutely in Paris and of course in Brussels. And that has prompted UK police forces to recruit many more armed officers, unarmed police officers who are stepping up to be able to carry weapons, going through months and months of training. You may have seen our special report that's on all the Sky News platforms today, and it raises many important issues about how Britain is policed, whether you're happy being in a situation where there are more armed police officers on the streets. And Desmond Jadu is with us. Desmond, you're a community activist here in Lascelles in Birmingham. What do you see as the main issues as to how people would accept more armed police officers on the street? Do you think people are happy?
Well, I think it's not a matter about being happy, it's a matter about the necessity. I mean, things are changing, times are changing. I think in wake of the Paris attacks, there was mass solidarity in Birmingham and sympathy for what happened in Paris, to be perfectly honest. And it's one of these situations where the police have to respond in some way, shape or form. And do they react or do they adopt a responsive manner, or do they take proactive steps? And on this occasion, one has to welcome the fact that they're thinking about how to deal with it in advance as opposed to responding.
And I think that is a difficult thing for police forces to get right, isn't it? Because we all know that they have to make tough decisions and they are scrutinised very hard by the public, quite rightly so, because the public effectively pay for the police force. So how do you think they're getting it? Are they getting it about right in your view in terms of doubling the firearms cover? I mean, they are in the position where they say they know that that's what they need. What's your thought?
Well, they have to assess what they believe the requirements are. Their primary objective is to protect and serve the people of the West Midlands in this case, which is absolutely crucial. But whilst doing that, in order to develop trust and confidence, because you've got to get the buy-in from the public on this, the police have to be open and transparent, have transparent protocols. Importantly, from my perspective, when they get it right, yeah, you've got it right. However, on the other side, it hasn't happened in the West Midlands, thankfully, but in other places in the UK, when they've not got it right, what we have is sometimes a perception of closing ranks. That has to be addressed, because the importance of developing trust and confidence is being open and transparent. And you know, first thing, if you don't get it right, admit it and say we're going to have to take steps to fix it.
So we think in terms of cases like John Charles de Menezes, who was killed in London in the weeks after the 7/7 bombings, and then there were the 21/7 potential attacks that was intercepted. And then John Charles de Menezes was shot at Stockwell Tube Station. And of course there is huge scrutiny of what happens when someone is shot dead, quite rightly. But the damage that can be done if the police don't get that right is huge, isn't it?
Of course it is, and I think one of the issues is what the families had to go through to get where they are today. And that in itself does not enhance trust and confidence. And that's what's important. Sometimes, you know, hey, when you get it wrong, you know, just admit you've got it wrong, put mechanisms in place so it doesn't happen again, and move on. And that's how we've got to start doing things. When people have got to go through, you know, basically they've got to go to hell and back, to coin a phrase, you know, it's not helpful. And that time, trust and confidence diminishes. And it's a partnership now. The streets of our policing within our communities is about partnerships. It's about community playing their part, it's about the authorities playing theirs, and somewhere we meet in the middle. The only problem is at the minute, where do we meet? Do we meet, you know, 3/4 of the way one side or 3/4 of the way the other? It's best to always try and find that equilibrium point, and that's how you develop trust and confidence.
Just a reminder, you're watching Sky News Live on Facebook. We'd love to hear your comments and questions as to this issue of armed policing in the UK, whether you believe that the levels of armed policing is about right, whether the terror threat puts you in a position where you perhaps change your behaviour, or whether you're confident in the police force and the way that they're dealing with a very real threat, as we saw on the streets of Paris. I was in Paris for the week after those terrorist attacks, and it was horrific to see the aftermath of what happened there. And it has changed so much in the way that Europe is policed, and we're seeing that on the streets of the UK. Desmond Jaddu, as we've said, we've been chatting to him. He's a community activist here in the Zells in Birmingham. What is the hardest thing, do you think, for the police in trying to build that trust with communities? Because we've seen it in this report that we've had on Sky News today. They've been quite open, discussing the issues, showing their faces, because quite often armed police officers are obscured with their identities, sometimes for good reason. The West Midlands Police choosing to be open about this issue.
I think since this new Chief Constable has taken over, one of the things that he stressed to us as activists is that he would be as open, as transparent as possible. The facts are, at the end of the day, if you want the public to buy in on what you're doing, then be open about it. So the fact that, you know, they were able to see an extensive report of what's going on, what the intentions are, the reasons for it as well, then that does go some step of the way to say, listen, we've identified this problem, this is how we're going to deal with it, we'd like your support in dealing with it, and importantly your understanding. And that's a step in the right direction to building that all-important trust and confidence.
Well, your comments and questions are starting to come through. Gary asks, what about asking Americans whether they feel safer? Because of course the principle of British policing is that it's an unarmed service, isn't it? Vastly different in the States.
Of course it is. I mean, my parents are from the Caribbean, so when I visit Jamaica, as soon as I step out of the airport, there's a police officer there with one gun in his waist and a massive, machine gun in some situations. And that's all over, and you see that. I mean, at the end of the day, the American experience is different, but there are issues there, particularly towards members of the BME community as well. And the facts are, you know, those are issues that need to be addressed. And as I've said, it's all about being open and transparent and not making excuses. I think the American experience, a lot of excuses have been made. There's a lot of the times, as I said before, instead of admitting you've got it wrong, you try and build a case against the victim, ultimately, which sometimes isn't right, and that doesn't help.
Of course. Kimberly's got in touch and asks whether more guns just breed more guns and violence. And I suppose we have to look at this not just in a terrorism sphere, but gangs and guns, which is a problem here in the Zells in Birmingham just as much as it is in any other inner city in the UK. Do you feel that there's almost a ratcheting up of things if you get more guns on the streets?
Facts are, at the end of the day, I mean, we've got to remember that guns for the police are what we call legitimised firearms, for argument's sake. That's what they are, because obviously at the end of the day, police officers have got to go through a certain protocol before they would even be able to fire that gun. We have got illegal firearms on the streets. Yes, there is a gun problem, and the facts are, at the end of the day, when someone gets killed, you know, as a result of an issue on the streets of our city, then there is an outcry, what are the police doing? So sometimes, you know, you've just got to make that decision, rightly or wrongly, on what to do. But, you know, there's no one answer to this at all. It's a part of the actual solution, but it's not the be all and end all.
Of course. And one of the things that struck me, we spent 3 days with the officers at West Midlands Police, and the thoroughness of the way that they are drilled and how exhausting that is mentally and physically for the officers who are training was something that really stood out. Is that this is a tough process, and you're conditioning people to be able to make huge decisions. Because in your job, in my job, in many other jobs, you just don't get to that level of decision making where it's somebody's life in your hands in a split second when you have to make the decision. I mean, not many people could do that, could they, Desmond?
No, I mean, as activists, we were actually invited down and given a brief on how people are trained in firearms. And if they make one little error, then they're off the course. You know, it's a case of You know, the police have high standards in terms of seeking perfection from officers who ultimately will carry firearms.
One final quick question from Daniel, who says, I don't mind armed units, but I wouldn't like to see all police armed. Do you think that's kind of a general kind of British feeling? That we know that there's a threat, but we don't want to get to a level that we see in America or we see in other parts of the world?
The facts are, at the end of the day, many countries, police are armed. There has been an understanding for many years that police in this country are unarmed. I would agree, not wholesale arming of police, but sufficient units to respond when necessary.
Okay, Desmond, many thanks for joining us on Sky News for Facebook this afternoon. And you can, of course, catch up with our special report into the armed police training for those terror situations, but also training for any situation that they could find out on patrol of the West Midlands. Please check it out on all the Sky News platforms, and we'll see you soon.